Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, the Internet of Things should really be called the Internet of Terrible. And we'll cover the stories this week that prove our case, and then we'll submit our solution to you, the TechSNAP audience. Plus, the real security issues of Android fragmentation, your great questions, our answers, a packed roundup, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi, everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 288 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on October 13th, 2016. This episode is brought to you by our three fine sponsors, DigitalOcean, Ting, and IX Systems. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this here show goes on. Oh, our live stream and all of the downloads over at Jupiter Broadcasting? Well, that's powered by Scale Engine over at scaleengine.com. Go check that out. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week for 288 weeks in a row, it's our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Allan Jude. Hello, Allan.
Hello, Chris. Everybody, thanks for watching.
Hi, Allan. Best shirt ever. Best shirt ever. And at first I'm like, what? It's a tweet, but it's like an epic tweet. My data center is bigger than yours. Hashtag I saw it first. That's a good shirt. Did you pick that up at a conference?
No, ISP mailed it to me for pre-ordering a server at their new data center.
That's awesome. That's great. So I was looking over the doc today, and the news segment is huge. And I like this first one because it's like would you call it?
It's like, actually 4 stories at once.
Yeah, it's like a roundup of sorts. The Internet of Terror roundup, you might say. Should we start there?
Yep.
All right. I think we start with Mr. Brian Krebs this week.
Yes. 3 out of the 4 stories in this roundup of stories are Krebs-nated.
Oh, okay.
So Krebs has been machine gunning articles about the Internet of Terror devices that were used to attack him recently.
Yeah.
And so I figured rather than trying to cover each of them individually, I would just kind of lump it all together and tie it in a neat bow.
Nice.
So first, he asks, who makes these Internet of Terror things that are attacking me? So his first post actually breaks down the manufacturers of the devices who are to blame for all this nonsense.
Oh, okay.
Although some of this is actually reverse engineering. So what he did is got the open source, the recent release source code for the botnet and got the giant list of default usernames and passwords out of it. Then he started Googling these and from that figuring out what device they belong to or work on.
That is a way to do it.
This list.
Talk about backing your way into it, though.
Yeah. So while this isn't necessarily 100% accurate, just because, for example, the default username root and the default password admin probably work on more than just the IPX DDK network camera.
Yeah.
But that was the one that he found.
So it could be even more, really.
System for the InQ InVision cameras and a bunch of other devices of that type. Or these Duha DVRs use the username root with the password 666-666 or 888-888 because passwords are hard.
Yeah, apparently, I guess I'm told.
Axis IP cameras, the default root password is pass.
That's
because
probably super.
Password is too much to type.
I actually have. I have gotten devices that I've purchased just from like the electronics store, Best Buy, and they have the password of pass. So I would bet there are. I mean, that's not even. I mean, I've probably maybe half a dozen devices over my life I've bought that have the default password of pass. It's probably pretty common.
Panasonic printers, we're lucky, have an 8-character password.
Okay.
0000000.
No.
Realtek routers, username root, password Realtek.
Damn it.
SMC routers, username admin, password SMC admin.
Oh, that's the worst.
Even your Ubiquiti AirOS routers, UBNT is the username and UBNT is the password.
The problem with using the username as the password is it's the first or second thing I try. If I try like a default password that doesn't work, maybe I just try username.
Admin, password, admin, and a couple others.
Oh, man. That's the worst. Some of these, too, are vendors like you'd hope Ubiquiti, who would be... Yep. I mean, some of this might be old, but the problem is if they've shipped it, there's devices out there with it.
Mm-hmm. So it says, as Krebs observed over the weekend, the source code that powers the Internet of Things botnet that attacked him is publicly released, and so he looked at it to get the list of passwords. He says it continuously scans the internet for Internet of Things systems protected by factory default usernames and passwords. Many readers have asked for more information about which devices and hardware makers were being targeted. As it happens, it was very easy to tell by looking at the list of usernames and passwords and then Googling them. He says, in all, there are 68 unique username and password pairs in the botnet source code. However, many of these are generic and used by dozens and dozens of products, including routers, security cameras, printers, and DVRs. All of the passwords are quite bad. If you look at them, they're usually fairly straightforward. A couple of them seem kind of random, like this high silicon one is HI3518, but I think the 3518 is the model number.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Some of these other ones, like this one is just JVBZD. So they kind of tried to be random, although 5 characters isn't enough. But it's the same 5 characters on every one of the devices. It's like, that doesn't work. Like, how hard is it to make the password like the last so many numbers of the serial number or something that's printed on the sticker on the bottom of the device so you're not going to lose it, but is unique to every device?
Yeah, you just have to come up with a way at the time of the image generation to do that. And that is technically...
Well, it doesn't even have to be that. You can use the same image on every one. When it boots up, it just has to change from the default password.
You're right. That would
to
be
this
how
other
you,
password.
That's how you do it.
You don't even have to make a unique image for each one.
That's free. That's basically free. Doing that would be free.
Exactly.
Here's the thing.
Exactly.
Here's what really gets me is... Like I just mentioned a second ago, like with these Ubiquity ones, they may have changed the default password now or fixed it now, but if you ship it once, it's too late. So if you make a single mistake when it comes to this stuff, you end up with these devices out in the wild and there's no coming back from that. You can maybe patch a solid percentage of them, but you'll never get 100%. There's no coming back. So it is imperative that they get the initial release of this product, at least in regards to security, right.
Yeah. It's terrible.
Yeah. All right. So is that just part one of this?
Yeah.
Okay.
So regardless of whether your device is listed above or not, if you own a wired or wireless router, an IP camera, or any other device that has a web interface, and you haven't yet changed the factory default credentials, your system may already be part of an IoT botnet. Unfortunately, there's no simple way to tell if your device has been compromised. However, the solution to eliminating and preventing infections of this particular malware, like Maria, which is loaded only into memory, means that it gets wiped out every time you power cycle the device. So turn the device off, unhook it from the network except for maybe directly to your laptop or something, power it on, change the default password, and then put it back. And then now it's not going to get hacked as easily. There may still be some other flaw that allows somebody to hack it eventually, but you're protected from the big one, which is the default password.
Yeah.
Several readers have pointed out that while advising IoT users to change the password via the device's web interface is a nice security precaution, it may or may not address the fundamental threat. That's because the Maria malware spreads via communication services called Telnet and SSH. Krebs assumes you don't necessarily know what those are, but obviously the audience of TechSNAP, I hope, does, which are command line text-based interfaces that are typically accessed, from the command prompt or whatever. The trouble is, even if you change the password in the device's web interface, the same default credentials may still allow you to log in over Telnet and SSH. A lot of these devices use a separate password database for the web interface than they do for SSH. So even if you went in the web interface and changed the default password, that default password might still work for SSH. Worse, a bunch of these devices don't allow you to change the Telnet password, which just never makes any sense. None of these devices should ever use Telnet. It should be SSH. And if it is SSH, they really should allow you to change the password. It doesn't make sense for them not to.
I agree. And the only reason you wouldn't want them to is if you need to know the password yourself for some reason.
Well, as a manufacturer, that's not how you should do it.
Yeah, I agree. That's why it shouldn't be a problem. It shouldn't be an issue.
If you really need a support system, install a couple of SSH keys. Not one, a couple.
Yeah, okay.
And then you can always, you keep the keys. You use the first one, you lock the other two up, And if something happens the first one, you can revoke it and use the second one.
Boy, wouldn't it be great, too, if that was an option in the device's UI? Enable remote customer support. You check that, and then it activates that account, and that'll log into that key.
Yes.
Seems like it wouldn't be that much work.
Nope. And yeah. So in some of them, you can disable SSH entirely. If you're not going to use it, that's a good idea. More tips on securing devices, go to Krebs' website and read the article.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Krebs' next article.
Yeah.
Europe is now pushing new new security rules for Internet of Things devices. The European Commission is drafting new cybersecurity requirements to beef up security around the so-called Internet of Things, such as web-connected security cameras, routers, and digital video recorders. News of the expected proposal comes as security firms are warning that a great many IoT devices are equipped with little or no security protection. The Commission would encourage companies to come up with a labeling system for Internet-connected devices that are approved and secure.
Boy, that sounds like that could be a mess, though. I like the idea on the surface.
But how do you give it security stars or something?
And how does the regulatory body stay up to date with security requirements?
The Commission is suggesting that companies come up with their own system for this.
So it'd be self-regulated, and then they stamp it with some sort of government approval?
Yeah. They say the EU labeling system that rates appliances based on how much energy they consume could be a template for the cybersecurity rating.
You know, I've heard something like that here when it comes to the I forget the labs, but there's the UEL certified labs. I can't remember what that's called.
And a bunch of stuff. Yes, but if you go to buy a new refrigerator, every refrigerator has a sticker saying, it uses this many watts of power, which is about this many dollars per year. And so, sure, that'd be great, except for how do you decide how many stars to give a device? In particular, most of the flaws, obviously having a default password means negative 100 stars. But
there you go.
A lot of the other flaws here, it's it turns out if you deep link to a certain page in the web interface, it just never checks if you're even logged in and allows you to make changes without even having to be logged in.
Right. Common.
How do you test for all of those things? We can make a giant list of every flaw that anybody's ever had before and test them. But, that is going to take a bunch of time and money.
Well, and how would a body like that...
It's not going to stop new vulnerabilities.
Exactly.
It's not as simple as, these ratings that they're trying to come up with, I don't think.
Yeah. They would have to be able to respond on a near weekly basis because there's always new things being discovered. There's new vulnerabilities.
So the idea of having a number of security stars on the box is great, but...
It would probably actually lead to poor consumer information, though. Because
how many devices are going to come out with not 5 stars?
Well, right. And I bought a 5-star box. I don't understand why there's an issue. What's the problem here? I got a 5-star box. I did my research. I got the ones Consumer Reports
if they
told
want
me.
to pass a law, how about if it turns out you have a security problem of at least this degree, you have to do a recall and give all your customers their money back.
Something like they do.
But that's not going to work because these IoT device companies set up a separate company for each device so that they can just close after they sell it.
I was going to say, what about a stock market investment where you look at their risks and the issues they've had? They have to have a public reporting.
A bond. That. If you want to sell an IoT device, you must give the government $250,000.
Oh boy!
Just in case you end up causing public disaster with your device.
This is honestly, let's be real. What they need to do is they need to stop forking. They need to just ship mainstream operating systems that are getting patched upstream. They need to be able to relay those patches onto their users. All the technology is here. These are internet-connected devices. They can receive updates. Atomic updates are possible. You don't have to risk bricking the device during an update. All of this is achievable. Google ships out monthly updates to Nexus devices. Those are technically Internet of Things devices. It can be done. They just have to do it. That's really what it doesn't need. We don't need regulation
for these dual firmware updated Internet of Things type devices since the 90s.
I agree. Perhaps the argument for regulation comes in because they just haven't gotten the job done, I suppose.
Yep.
So okay.
But yeah, this sounds great, but how do you actually rate the cybersecurity of a device? Who's going to be allowed to do these audits? Who decides if an auditor is qualified enough to do the audit? And it's just, sadly, it doesn't work like that.
Mm-hmm.
For example, one of these devices has a default password, username root, and the password is XC3511.
Oh, nice.
But this is a broad array of white label DVR and IP camera electronics. Basically, one Chinese company called Zhongmai Technology makes this, and then literally hundreds of downstream vendors buy that, slap their logo on it, and sell it with the same default password.
Yeah.
And no firmware updates.
And of course, these white labels often are fly-by-night companies.
Yeah. Well, in particular, the white label that they make the device, and then but they never get the reputation because they're not selling the device to you. It was a D-Link or some other off-brand you've never heard of or something. It could be anything. But yeah. So Krebs says that information comes in an analysis posted this week by Flashpoint Intel, whose security analyst discovered that the web-based administration page for devices made by this Chinese company can be trivially bypassed. If you don't go to IP address/login.htm and go directly to dvr.htm, you can do whatever you want without having to even enter the username and password. So having the default username and password is bad, but you don't even need that. You could just go directly to a certain page and start using the device for whatever you want. The issue with these particular devices is that users cannot feasibly change the password. That password is hard-coded into the firmware, and the tools necessary to disable it are not even present. Even worse, the web interface is not aware that these credentials even exist. So you can SSH into the device using a username that the web interface doesn't even know about. There's no way to change the password or disable SSH.
What could go wrong? Nothing.
Every single thing could go wrong.
Wait.
So, the Internet of Things is terrible.
Yeah.
Devices are all insecure. There's default passwords everywhere. It's all terrible.
So far, I agree.
Yeah. So now, Krebs, is Internet of Things devices are now being used as proxies by cyber criminals.
Oh, man.
This post looks at how criminals are using hacked IoT devices as proxies to hide their true locations online as they engage in a variety of other types of criminal activity, from frequently underground forums to credit card and tax refund fraud. So the criminals use your Internet of Things device as a proxy, and since a lot of these devices have basically no storage for logs or anything,
sure,
there's no evidence left behind, or they could just erase it, and then they bounce off the device at your house. So when the police track down who committed the tax refund fraud, they come knocking at your door.
Right.
And it looks like it was you. So Krebs says, recently I heard from a cybersecurity researcher who's created a virtual honeypot environment designed to simulate hackable Internet of Things devices. The source, who asked to remain anonymous, said his honeypot soon began seeing traffic destined for ASUS and Linksys routers using default credentials. When he examined what the traffic was designed to do, he found that his honeypot system was being told to download a piece of malware from a destination on the web. The researcher found that the malware was being pushed to his honeypot system was designed to turn his faux internet routers into SOX proxy servers, essentially a host designed to route traffic between a client and a server. More often, SOX proxies are used to anonymize connections because they can help obfuscate the true origin of the client. What he observed was that all of the systems were being used for a variety of badness, from proxying web traffic destined for cybercrime forums to testing stolen credit cards at merchants online. Further study of the malware files and the traffic beacon emanating from the honeypot system indicated that his honeypots were being marketed on a web-based criminal service that sells access to SOX proxies in exchange for bitcoins. So not only do they use your Internet of Things devices to commit cybercrime, they're actually renting out, they're whoring out your router and your DVR to other criminals. They're pimping your stuff. Pimp my router. Not the way you're thinking. Not make it badass. Literally, whore it out.
Yeah, they own your stuff and then they sell it.
Yeah, they rent it out. Like a prostitute.
And meanwhile, you're trying to, people think about it when people buy devices, right? They try to buy something they can afford that's going to perform the way they want.
Yeah, I just wanted a security camera for the front of my house. I didn't want to get involved with Russian mafia stealing credit cards. Or worse, I bought this device to protect my children, and now someone's using it for child porn to anonymize their browsing.
Wow.
All kinds of terrible. So Krebs on his site has a bunch of tips for securing your router and Internet of Things device to help prevent some of this. Next, Threat Post has SSH TCP forwarding on by default on many Internet of Things devices used in new credential stuffing attacks. So of
Credential
course,
stuffing? Credential
Yes.
stuffing? Okay.
So of course, routers and other Internet of Things devices sometimes have SSH turned on and are being used as proxies even without being compromised. So the default SSH configuration allows anybody with a valid username and password to use the TCP forwarding feature to do an SSH proxy. Lots of people do this all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But because there's a default username and password on all these devices, it means anybody that knows the password can connect to your device and bounce their connection off of it. This allows attackers to log into the IoT device using the default credentials, sometimes that you can't even change, and then bounce their connection off the device and leave no trace. It's like, do the people that make these IoT devices not know how to edit SSHD_config?
I don't know. I can't, I don't know.
Yep. The senior security research team leader from Akamai says, we're in for an internet of unpatchable things. And I'm terrified about it.
Yeah, I think we're kind of there. And we started really with the routers. I mean, we make fun of the Hughes lights and the whatnots, but we really did start with these routers and these printers and these cameras.
DVRs and smart TVs. And
so it's already there. I mean, yeah, the other stuff's just going to add to the problem.
Yep. Well, that's it for that story.
Jeez, Alan. I'm kind of left. I'm just like sitting with it for a second. Like I'm just like what do you? It's kind of a downer. It's kind of a downer. And we saw real ramifications of it recently too, which sort of adds a little bit of an underline to it. Well, all right. So that was like 4 or 5 stories in one batch. So we have them all broken out in the show notes. Alan has it all copiously documented for you as well. Is there anything else you want to mention?
No, that's it for that one.
All right. Well, let's talk about something that is sustainable, something you can manage, something that you can install updates on, and that's your own droplet over at DigitalOcean.com. DigitalOcean.com! Use our promo code, and you get a $10 credit. SnapOcean, it's one word. You apply it to your account, and you get a $10 credit. And I mentioned that specifically because if you look at their hourly pricing, you could really get some distance, because $10 is $10. I mean, you can run a 3 cents an hour rig and really try to just experiment with stuff and see how it goes. They have...
Well, yeah, I actually had somebody write in to BSD Now the other day saying, I'm trying to compile this software and it's C++, and because of the templates and stuff, it actually takes like 2.5 gigs of RAM to compile. And I was like, well, you could spin up a DigitalOcean droplet with, say, 4 or 8 gigs of RAM just for the 1 hour to compile it, and then move the compiled version over to your lower price droplet.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a big use case, and if you just take advantage of their template system, you could have a template on your account ready to go that isn't even taking any money. And then you deploy it, you spin it up in seconds. Their interface is so easy to use too that if you're like a pro, then you're going to find this interface to be pretty competent, and you're surprised in what it allows you to do. But if you're a beginner, you're going to actually find it usable and easy to understand. If you use our promo code SnapOcean too, there's no risk. You get a $10 credit. You can try it out for free for 2 months if you try their $5 rig. With their nice interface and their straightforward API, the only thing that I would also be remiss not to mention would be their fantastic documentation. And if I'm not mistaken...
Did you not mention the locations?
Yeah, that's true. That does matter, doesn't it? New York, San Francisco, Singapore, Amsterdam, London, Toronto, Germany, and India. So you can really have a global presence. And I use that...
Also, they're just on top of it. Literally, FreeBSD 11 came out on Monday.
That's what, yep.
And on Monday, they had support for FreeBSD 11, ZFS, and UFS droplets.
That shows that I think they made it a priority there. That's really cool.
Oh, yeah. They were on the mailing list getting help with it before. They were seeking beta testers, and they had it. The day it came out, they had it on DigitalOcean.
That's awesome. Wow. Yeah, I've spun up a couple of East Coast droplets just simply so that way when I'm distributing files that way using peer-to-peer software, I can distribute it to my listeners in those regions just a little bit faster for $5 a month. Why not? It gives me a global presence. And then if you're a FreeBSD user, obviously you can hear right there, they're keeping FreeBSD a priority. And one of the other things you'll notice too is they've got CoreOS, they've got Debian, they've got Fedora, they've got Ubuntu. There's a lot of stuff available just with a base system or entire application stacks that you'll find something to do. It's really nice, and it's got great documentation. And you've got our promo code, SnapOcean. One word, lowercase. It'll give you a $10 credit at DigitalOcean.com. And a big thank you to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. And I like also, if you guys want to tweet us with what you're using DigitalOcean droplets for, let us know.
All kinds of stuff.
I'm sure there's probably some pretty interesting use cases out in the TechSNAP audience. Yeah, so let's
backup mail server, status page server.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
A status page server would be really good.
Well, right, because we've seen most companies have one of these now, and you need it somewhere completely off your infrastructure so that when your infrastructure is down, you have somewhere to post the updates. And so I was like, at $5 a month, it's pretty hard to argue that it's too complicated to throw that bit of software up on a droplet and just let it go.
Something else, too, that I've noticed is because the UI on DigitalOcean is consistent and simple, when we're working with multiple people, it is nice that everybody knows how to use the interface now, because even if you're new to it...
team feature.
Yeah.
The fact that I can be in 3 different teams and just switch between them in the UI and do the right thing is so useful.
Yeah, that is. Especially if you're setting something up for somebody.
Well, especially I don't have to log out and log in as my other account. Yeah. I log out and log in my other account.
Yep.
Even Amazon doesn't have that nailed down like that.
No, it's nice. It is nice. So use our promo code SNAPOcean. Just try it out. Okay, so let's shift gears and talk about our next news story. I'm totally consumed by the graphic that Ars Technica went with here. The headline is, the NSA could put undetectable trapdoors in millions of crypto keys. I'm really glad you put this in here because...
That's actually not going... this, unusually for Ars, they kind of overstated the thing.
I thought so too. That's why I'm really glad you put this in here, because when I saw that headline, I'm like, I got to ask Allan about this. So what is the story?
Yes. So researchers have discovered a way to factor certain 1024-bit Diffie-Hellman keys.
Okay.
So the researchers have devised a way to place undetectable trapdoors in the cryptographic keys that protect websites, virtual private networks, and internet servers. The feat allows hackers to passively decrypt hundreds of millions of encrypted communications, as well as cryptographically impersonate the key owner. So... yes, no, not quite.
Okay.
So there's been a lot of hype about this, and that's why I decided to cover this story, because it's not really quite the end of the world like they're making it sound.
Okay.
So then we go over to the researchers' post, and they have the actual details. And they say, we've completed a cryptanalysis computation, which is at the same time a formidable achievement in terms of size, that is the 1024-bit discrete logarithm computation of a Diffie-Hellman key, and a small-scale undertaking in terms of computational resources. It took about 2 calendar months of between 2,000 and 3,000 cores of CPU power. So, that's a lot of cores.
Yeah, they threw some power at this.
A couple of months of 3,000 cores is quite a bit of computer resources. But it's perfectly feasible for an attacker that really wants your stuff.
Yeah.
In comparison, the real record for discrete logarithms cracking a 768-bit Diffie-Hellman, which was announced this spring, required more than 10 times as much computational power as their attack. They say, to achieve this, we cheated deliberately. We chose the prime number, which defines the problem, to be solved in a special way so that the computation will be made much more efficient. However, we did this in a subtle way so that the trapdoor we inserted cannot be detected. So they used a special process to pick the prime number they used to make it easier to crack the resulting encryption, but done it in such a way that if you're only looking at the prime number, you can't tell whether it has the trapdoor or not. They say, unfortunately, for most of the prime numbers used in cryptography today, we have no guarantee that they were not generated with a trapdoor like this. We estimate that breaking a non-trapdoor 1024-bit prime is at least 10,000 times harder than breaking the trapdoor ones that they did.
Okay.
They say, our computation raises questions about some internet standards that contain opaque fixed primes. So some standards say, just use this prime, but they don't say where they got that number from or the process they used to come up with it, meaning possibly they picked it as one that they know the way to solve it quickly. Theoretically, we know how to guarantee that primes have not been generated with a trapdoor, but mostly wisely used primes come with no such public guarantee. A malicious party who inserted a trapdoor prime into a standard or a specific implementation would be able to break any communication whose security relies on one of those primes in a relatively short amount of time. Solving discrete log of a Diffie-Hellman key exchange lets the attacker decrypt the messages encrypted with the negotiated key, right? So we use Diffie-Hellman as a way to, in public, between two people, pass some numbers and come up with a secret key that we've never sent across the internet, so someone listening doesn't actually know the secret key, and then we use that to do the encryption. If someone knows the prime numbers and factor it, then they can figure out what the magic number we used as the encryption key is and be able to decrypt all the stuff we sent back and forth. Or with DSA signatures, it would allow the attacker to forge the signature by basically making a new signature so it looks like the person we trust actually signed this when it wasn't. It was the attacker.
Okay.
So we have a way to make sure that the process used to select a prime is not backdoored. So we know a way to make sure we end up with a prime that's not backdoored, but we don't have a way to look at any given prime and tell if it was backdoored. So it just means that we need to make sure we follow the right process whenever coming up with these prime numbers. He says, we've not been able to find any documented seeds or verifiable randomness for a bunch of widely used 1024-bit primes, such as the ones in RFC 5114, whereas some standards use the nothing up my sleeve numbers to generate primes, like the Oakley groups or the negotiated finite field Diffie-Hellman group used in TLS 1.3, which is RFC 7919. Those provide a reasonable guarantee that they do not contain a backdoor because they describe the process they use to come up with the random number. And so we know they didn't pick it specifically as one that they would be able to crack. Some older standards contain magic numbers without a description of how they came up with that number, which could be innocent or it could be bad. Without information about the process that was used to come up with the number, we have no way to tell that it's actually secure. Only numbers in some of the newer standards where we actually have the, a nothing up my sleeve policy where they actually explain the process they used and is a verifiable way to make sure the prime they came up with is randomly selected, not, engineered to provide certain advantages to them. That's the only way to make sure that we end up with a secure number. They also point out the attack we described affects only Diffie-Hellman and DSA. It does not affect elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman or elliptic curve DSA. It also does not affect RSA because there are no global public parameters like the primes used in Diffie-Hellman for RSA.
Okay.
So most websites are probably not all that affected.
That's why. Okay.
Yeah. But some things like OpenVPN, maybe. It really depends on the setup.
Okay.
But, a lot of websites are using RSA rather than DSA, and so they're okay. And most browsers automatically prefer ECDH or ECDSA over regular DSA and DH, specifically because they're better. Also, they say Diffie-Hellman primes, the researchers say, if you run a server, you should use elliptic curve cryptography or primes that are at least 2048-bit. As we learned earlier this year, Diffie-Hellman primes less than 1024 have been banned because of the logjam attack. Most browsers will just automatically refuse a connection if you're not using at least 1024. So I'm guessing at some point we'll eventually be able to raise that to 2048 and also eliminate this problem. Hopefully most people who generated new primes around that time or since then are using at least 2048 anyway. There's no reason to generate smaller ones, really. They also say, if you are a developer or standard committee member, make sure you use verifiable randomness to generate any fixed cryptographic parameters and publicly document the seed you used so that someone else can use the same process to come up with the same number and therefore prove that you didn't fiddle with the process to give you some advantage in decryption or whatever. They say that Appendix A.1.1.2 of the FIPS 186 specification describes how to do this for DSA primes as well. So there's documented ways to do this properly. So every new standard should do it properly, and we won't have this problem. And for the old ones, there are maybe a couple of especially selected prime numbers that might be a problem or might not. But as long as we use Diffie-Hellman at least 2048, probably not a problem.
Okay.
So yes, while this is very interesting research and has some implications, it's not the end of the world like a bunch of the news articles are trying to make it say.
Yeah, that ours one that's a stinger. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, millions of crypto keys. It's like, well, yes and no. Like DSA, you're actually pretending to be the key, but with Diffie-Hellman, you're just, well, you can compromise millions of keys. They're all the temporary keys, right? They're the key that's negotiated for that one connection only.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, Alan, any other thoughts? That was good to get that debunked. I don't know.
Right. Well, it's not entirely bogus or anything. It's
I read that headline and I thought, something about that didn't smell right. So, all right. Well, I'll tell you what does smell right. That's IX Systems. Go to ixsystems.com/TechSNAP and go get some great hardware powered by the greatest Intel processors built for your open source workload. In fact, if you go to IX Systems, you'll see a little picture into what could be a range of hardware for a small business all the way up to a large enterprise. Storage obviously is great with a huge power area for IX Systems, but anything really in the compute area, virtualization, they have a lot of experience there. ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. And while you're there, go visit their blog. They have an update right now on IX Systems attendance at Ohio Linux Fest. Have you seen this post, Alan?
No, I didn't see that one.
Yep, it's up there.
I saw a post from Michael Lucas, who was also there, because he said a bunch of people came up to him and was like, "Oh, you're that guy that wrote the book with Allan."
Is that Groff?
That's interesting because, yeah, that's Groff. Yep, the previously Foundation.
Oh, really? Michael Lucas got approached about the book. That's awesome.
Yes. Well, what was interesting is at a BSD conference, it's usually Michael wrote the book and I helped.
Yeah.
But when it was people who watch TechSNAP and BSD now and so on going to Ohio Linux Fest, it's like, oh, we know Allan, not you. Whereas,
That's awesome.
At the BSD stuff, Michael's been in the community like 10 plus or 20 years longer than me.
Yeah, it just depends on what their background is, though. That's great. Yeah, I guess this post was written by Ken. Ken works on TrueOS, which, a.k.a.
Yes, Chris's brother.
A.k.a.
Not
PCBSD.
you, Chris, yes.
And Ken and Chris both work for IX. Mm-hmm. And I think that just sort of right there shows you IX Systems has been watching the industry for a long time, and they've been hiring certain key developers, giving them jobs to help them so they can keep working on what they're working on and contribute to IX and contribute to the overall open source ecosystem while having a full daytime job, which is pretty awesome because Chris and Ken are just one example of many, and IX Systems' involvement with the community is huge because it pays off in ways that give them insight into upcoming trends and allow them to build hardware that truly meets your large work demand. It's surprising. If you're a shop like Jupiter Broadcasting size, not very big, all the way up to huge enterprises, you can check out their client list and see.
The fact that they're willing to help you build a little FreeNAS Mini for your house or sell you, 8 racks full of gear for your giant corporation or whatever. It's like your NASA. Okay, here's 8 racks full of gear. Mm-hmm. Or it's like there's not many companies who are willing to talk to you and NASA at the same time.
That is true.
It usually just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Yeah, look at that. NASA, the U.S. Army is also in there. NOAA is in there. There's a lot of different agencies in there. That's interesting. They have across healthcare, financial services, manufacturing, and of course high tech. They have a ton of great customers. You can check it out at their page, ixsystems.com. Do me a favor and go to ixsystems.com/TechSNAP and then go look at their client page, look at their blog, get a little idea, and download their comprehensive white paper that helps grease the wheels up the ladder at your company. So that way you can start building a more reliable IT platform. ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. Thanks, IX, for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. Looking forward to seeing some of you guys at Meet BSD. Mm-hmm. Meet BSD. So,
yes, also, if you're going to Meet BSD, go to meetbsd.com/vote and help us pick the topics for the breakout sessions.
Yeah, there's also like a vote link at the top of the Meet BSD page, too. This is a soapbox of mine. It's something that's bothered me a lot, and it's one of the reasons why I'm having a hard time using Android anymore. It's the fragmentation issue. Upstream Android's getting patched all the time, but downstream nobody's getting them. And I honestly
I've never actually got numbers like this before. I found this very interesting.
I mean, obviously, there's our audience. They have ways around this between alternative ROMs by using Nexus devices. So some of this isn't directly applicable to them, but it does feel like it's a major issue. So where do we start?
Yeah. So we start at the top. It's been 13 months since Google began releasing Android security bulletins and software patches on a scheduled monthly basis. And so far, the benefits of this new strategy to shore up Android's defenses have been kind of mixed, because it's helped improve a lot of devices, but there's a lot of people that aren't getting them because they don't have somebody between Google and the user is holding up the patches.
Mm-hmm.
So security experts say to look no further than this past August, Google's patching of the high-profile quad router vulnerability that took 96 days from when the vulnerability notification by Qualcomm went out to the final release of the critical patch for the flaws, which didn't happen until September.
96 days.
Yeah, between when. So they got a nice little timeline here. You can see when the researchers sent the first notification of the problem to Qualcomm in February, and then they sent more all throughout April. And Qualcomm released the first patch in May, and then the other patches in July, and they finally released the last patch at the very around August, and it was 96 days before Google actually installed all of the patches.
But then you have no guarantee that the downstream OEMs even applying those patches.
Mm-hmm.
So there's delays at all areas of the chain.
Mm-hmm. By comparison, it took Apple just 10 days from the time researchers tipped off the company to the notorious Trident vulnerabilities, which were publicly attacked, unlike Quadrouter, for Apple to release a patch.
10 days.
Now, yeah, but that was a much higher profile thing. Google might have moved faster. But also the other problem is that this one, it wasn't a flaw in Android per se. It was a flaw in the Qualcomm bit under that. So it was probably a little, that's not necessarily a fair comparison, but 96 days is a bit too long.
But doesn't the iPhone also have Qualcomm? I mean,
Sure, but the Trident vulnerability was different. It was just an iOS problem. And so it's easy for Apple to fix iOS, and it's easy enough for Google to fix Android. But when it's getting down into the baseband stuff,
and a third-party hardware,
that's a little more complicated.
Right, yeah.
But, there's a stark difference in patching times, and hopefully Google can do better than that. From media server hardening and file-level encryption, Google's security efforts are still stymied by the nagging problem of fragmentation. For example, only a fraction of phones vulnerable to quad router vulnerability actually got the Google's patch so far. One interesting stat here is that according to Google, there are 60,000 unique models of Android devices.
Wow.
Now, this includes, tablets and set-top boxes and things other than phones. But yeah, 60,000 unique models. Now, sometimes a phone will have 8 different models or something, and they'll all run the same software. So that's less fragmentation. But, if you look at Apple, if you add up every different possible model of iPhone, that's only, a handful of possible
8 of
phones,
them or
right?
something, or 9 or...
Well, there's more than that.
I guess.
Each different size of
you got each
iPhone,
size, and you got
it's
the
probably
SE.
under 100 versus 60,000.
Yeah, okay.
Kyle Lady, who's a researcher and developer at Duo Labs, says issues tied to fragmentation are also hurting Android's ecosystem on 2 fronts. One front is Google's effort to work with the myriad partners and identify risks and prepping patches for Google's monthly security updates. The second is making sure that those patches are actually deployed by Android handset makers and wireless carriers to consumers in a timely manner. And really, Google has no control over that. They can yell and stomp their feet, but the carriers and providers can block them as much as they want, really. This is since Google released its latest fix, because there's 4 different fixes for the quad router thing, and when they released the latest one, only 15% of Android phones capable of receiving the security update have actually done so.
Wow.
According to the most recent data available to Duo Labs, which is collected October 5th.
Yikes.
So if you scroll down a little bit to the next graphic, this is the startling one. So they did a graph here of the percentage of Android phones that haven't been patched in the last 90 days. Right, so this is phones that are missing at least 3 months of patches. And if you break it down, Nexus devices, only 2.3% of phones aren't patched.
Wow, that's great.
Meaning almost every single phone has the patch.
That might be better than the
That's
iPhone.
Really great. Yeah. Samsung, though, is the second best with 55% of the phones unpatched in the last 90 days.
More than half.
More than half of their phones don't have the don't have patches within the last 90 days.
Which is millions of phones, possibly.
And they're the second best behind Nexus. They're actually ahead of all of their competitors with a number of less than half the phones have patches in the last 90 days. LG, 73% of phones don't have the last 90 days worth of patches.
Wow.
That's 3/4 of all their phones unpatched. Motorola, 96%. Sony, 98%. It's like Sony doesn't patch anything ever? How does that work? Those numbers are very, very dismaying.
Super. Those numbers are damning. So yes. 96%, 96.5% for Motorola surprises me the most. Out of all of these ones, that's the one that surprises me simply because not only is Motorola generally known for not having a huge overhead on Android, but for a while they were owned by frickin' Google.
Yeah, well, what's funny is that my Nexus phone has a giant Motorola logo on it.
Right, that one was built by Motorola, yeah.
Yeah, but it counts as a Nexus phone, so it's different. Well, I think part of the thing is, did Motorola actually make any phones recently that aren't Nexus?
Yeah, yeah, they've made, yeah.
Okay. So what's interesting is I'd like to know some of the stats on this one of how old the phones they actually included in this. Like if it's every Samsung phone ever, then I'm sure there's a lot of old phones in use in different places that, do we really need to count 5-year-old phones in this? Kind of yes, but kind of no. It'd be interesting to see how those numbers look if you look at only phones sold in the last 18 months or something. I'd like to see do a trend analysis of, are we getting any better at this or are we getting worse?
Mm-hmm.
Right? For Google's part, one of the things I found interesting is actually spelled out Google's support policy for Nexus, which I was
murky on.
Glad to know.
Mm-hmm.
So Google part, it says it will provide support for its Nexus branded phones for at least 3 years from when they first started selling the device, or 18 months after the last time they sold the device. Now, I don't know if that means you're guaranteed 3 years plus up to 18 months after they've stopped selling it, or whichever one is less. But, I don't know. Are they selling any Nexus phones still, or did they already stop doing that, and so the 18-month countdown is already on?
Well, sure. I don't know about the Play Store itself, but I know you can still buy them on Amazon and Newegg. I'm not sure. Right. I haven't tried to go look to buy a Nexus phone since the Pixel was announced, but they did announce they're going to stop the Nexus program.
Yeah, so whenever they actually do stop, which might already be now, it's only 18 months left, although that's a reasonable lifetime on my phone, because I think I've had my phone for 18 months or so now, and so that'll add up to 3 years.
I would love 24, to be honest, but 18 seems reasonable.
Well, that's 18 after they stop selling it, and they're probably most phones were going to be for sale for at least 6 months, right? So, yeah, you're still guaranteed 24, but it sounds more like it'll be 3 years, which seems like a reasonable amount of time.
I guess so. It does. Yeah.
But my bigger question is, what am I going to buy next?
I think you're going to have to get a Pixel.
No.
You don't know?
I don't want to pay that much for a phone.
Oh, yeah. That's a thing. That is a thing. Yeah.
I always thought I was already, $650 for the Nexus here was kind of bad. And I was like, well, it is, giant Nexus 6, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like I shouldn't have to pay that much to get a phone that's going to be patched and not terrible.
That'll be the biggest, I think, disappointment I have with them ending the Nexus program is you could get a Nexus 5X for oftentimes for really great prices on sale, and a 5X is still a perfectly good phone. And I thought that was amazing. And I thought, even if it's not the best smartphone out there, if I can get an unlocked smartphone under $400 that I can put on the carrier of my choice, that's a great phone. That right there is an enabling phone. And so I was a little disappointed to see that, they're going to like $750 for the $650, I think, for the cheapest. It's double the price of what I could get a 5X for. But it looks like a nice phone, so I guess that's
I haven't looked that closely yet, but I've just, I saw the sticker price for like $1,000+, and I was like, nope.
Yeah, if you want to get reasonable storage, you want to get the bigger one. Your price is going to get up there.
I don't need that much storage. I don't walk around with a music library on my phone, but Anyway, so Motorola's phone unit was recently sold to Lenovo, which has had this to say recently. We understand that keeping phones up to date with security patches is important to our customers, and we strive to push security updates as quickly as we can. We work with our carrier partners, software providers, and other partners to extensively test patches before they are delivered, which can be in various forms such as pure security maintenance releases, scheduled maintenance releases, and OS upgrades. In August, Motorola said it couldn't promise its flagship Moto Z and Moto G4 would receive monthly Android security updates. Instead, Motorola said updates would be quarterly, which is at least something. Monthly would definitely be better, and they need to solve their process problem if they can't do monthly. But at least quarterly is something better than never.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Samsung and LG said that they have committed to monthly security updates for their new handsets. HTC did not respond to a request for comment for the story. So it seems like new phones are going to definitely be getting monthly updates, except for some that'll maybe only be quarterly. But maybe we're actually finally rounding the corner on this problem.
I hope so. I really do, because it always has struck me as a technological problem. It's always struck me as a solvable technological problem and more of a bureaucratic company
it's bureaucratic and process problem, right?
Yeah,
software development life cycle.
Technologically, we can fix this, and we can solve this.
It sounds like if we just taught a bunch of phone developers a class on how to use version control, whether it's SVN or Git or whatever, then we would solve this problem.
I like it.
It's like, every software developer needs to take a 1-year course on using version control properly.
I love it.
It's one of the greatest things you can learn from open source is how to properly use version control merge other people's stuff.
Preach it, Allan. Preach it.
When I hired people to work on a website at a startup, everyone claimed they knew how to use SVN, and they all could check stuff in and check stuff out. Although if they got a merge conflict, they were like, "Oh no, what do I do?" But then when it came to, we have a dev branch, well, let's merge the changes into QA. Or, you want to work on that new feature, create a dev branch to do it in, so that, if we want to push a fix to dev, we don't have to send your new feature out half baked or something, right? It's like it's fairly simple how to do this stuff.
Yeah, for real.
None of them could do it. Even after I was finished with that project, I got paid for like an hour once every 4 weeks to come in and merge their stuff to production for them. Yeah, they couldn't do it.
I resisted it myself for a while.
Someone in the chat room just said Allan could write a book on this and sell it. It's like, Subversion has a book. It's free. It's on the internet in its entirety, and it's free. I linked them to it's like 5 pages at most on how to do SVN merge in the workflow with having branches. And they're like, well, don't just tell me to read the fucking manual. Tell me how to do it. It's like, they have really good examples in the documentation, and they have graphics. Yeah. I couldn't explain it any better. Yeah. Just read it. And they're like, you're telling us to go read the manual. It's like, that's what the manual is for. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anyway,
preach it.
Google's also trying to solve this problem by completely going around the manufacturers and the carriers. With the release of Android 7.0 called Nougat, Google has attempted to become more self-reliant by creating independent apps that would otherwise be parts of the Android Core OS and be baked in features. For example, Google recently introduced its new Allo and Duo, which apparently is the replacement for Hangout. Where are they getting these names? This doesn't make any sense.
I know, and they now have. Now, when you get an Android phone, it comes with 3 text messaging programs right now. It comes with text message, Hangouts, and Allo. If you get a new Android phone.
And what's Duo?
Oh, and Duo, yeah, Duo, right. Duo. So Allo is a chat program that has Google Assistant built in, and Duo is video chat.
Hangouts.
Yeah. In video, no, it's just video chat, more like FaceTime.
Well, they say formerly Hangouts in the message. Anyway, so they have all these messaging features. Each one's a separate standalone app so that they can push updates to everybody's phone without having to go through the carriers.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest problem is that we had this old culture before Android of your carrier stuck their brand name on everything in your phone, right? You turn on the phone and it shows your carrier's logo and all this stuff from the age where phones were locked to a carrier.
Yeah, and your carrier's jingle plays as it boots up.
Yeah, all that stuff. And the carriers are like, yeah, well, we don't want to have to restamp every security update. and it turns out that you need to. So either piss off with the branding or do the work.
Yeah, did you hear there will be Verizon branding if you buy a Pixel through Verizon? It's going to be Verizon branding, and the updates will come through Verizon.
That Verizon branding, how much lag does that add to the security patches?
They say they're going to try to have them. This is a bit of a controversy. We'll see, right? We will see. And I could see Verizon getting the monthly updates. I think will come from Google. Big OS updates come from Verizon, and I could see like when Android 8 ships, I could see Verizon taking a little while to get that out.
Well, your phone carrier probably didn't ever think they were going to need a whole development team to constantly update old phones. They're like, no, but there's no money for us in old phones, so we just force people to buy new ones. So it's like, it's actually not going to work.
I do agree, but I also feel like maybe they could have gotten the message 5 years ago, because we're like 7, 8, 9 years into this now, and they still haven't quite figured it out. That's starting to get inexcusable at this point. Mm-hmm. I know you have a couple more things to say on that, right?
Nope, that was the end of it. Okay. It's just this way Google can push out software updates to any of those apps if they need it without having to get
It's also a convenient way to discontinue support for the open source version that shipped with Android and then close source the application and ship it via the Play Store, requiring people to have the Play APIs, to have the Play Store, and so you no longer get a good text message client or camera program or photo management program without having all of the Google services. So there's that too. Yeah, they are able now to update them independently of the OS. That is true, but they're also now no longer maintaining the upstream open source apps.
Yeah, it's like you don't get the open source Android app, photo app. You get the Google Photos app, which is like, I'm backing up all your photos to the cloud right now and then processing them and gaining information out of them. It's like, actually, could you not? Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to view my photo library.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's
what if I want to take a photo I don't want Google to have?
This is my main issue with Android. So really, if I want a secure Android device that I know is going to get updates, I pretty much at this point, going forward, have to buy a Pixel. So there's that. And then I have to...
Samsung and LG are promising that they're going to do monthly updates. We'll have to see.
Yeah, maybe I'll have to wait a year or two to see how that actually plays out.
But the other problem is that,
it's not just security updates, it's also OS updates.
Right. Well, although the OSs seem to iterate a little less frequently.
Yearly, right? They seem to ship by one every year. I don't know. I guess we'll just wait a little bit and see how it goes. In the meantime, I'm going to hang out at Ting, techsnap.ting.com. This is really how mobile should be. They don't get in the way of the updates. They don't have a Ting branded image that they have to ship on their handsets. The idea of that is ludicrous because Ting is built by geeks, people that are really into this stuff. Techsnap.ting.com. Take $25 off a device or get $25 in service credit. Now, I love Ting because they have CDMA and GSM networks, so whatever's stronger in your area you bring. Plus, that means more devices are usually compatible. Check out their BYOD page for that. The average Ting line is $23. Well, our deal gives you $25 in service credit if you bring a device. So that's going to pay for more than your first month of Ting service. And if you ever get stuck, you get to speak to a real human being. They have a fantastic dashboard. It's better than any other carrier's dashboard to manage all of this. A dashboard undersells it. It really is the tools you need to manage your Ting account, all the kind of things you might want to do. They also have some great posts. So if you just want to check out Ting, see how much you might save, go over to techsnap.ting.com. Try out their savings calculator. What would you save by clicking that? And while you're there, if you're kind of like Allan and you're thinking, geez, I don't want to spend $800 on my next smartphone, they have what they call 5 wise smartphone choices for less than $200. They did a blog post about the different phones you can get on Ting. Now, these are no contracts, no early termination fee. You just pay for what you use. $6 for the line and then your usage on top of that. Remember, I mentioned the 5X too. Go get CDMA or GSM, whichever you prefer. Buy it directly from Play or get it over at the Ting site. Why not? You're still going to get updates for 18 more months. These things are still selling. Also, I guess if you wanted to go cray-cray, Ting's already promoting the Google Pixel. So it looks like the Pixel's going to work on, I would imagine too, right? I would just buy it from the Play Store. Unlocked, move it over there, try it out. TechSNAP.ting.com, you get a $25 service credit. See how it goes. TechSNAP.ting.com, and a big thank you to Ting for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. TechSNAP.ting.com. Talk just that discussion. It's really sort of underlines why I think it's important to vote with your wallet. I think that Ting service is looking more and more important all the time to have somewhere you can go to say this is how it should be. So speaking of how it should be, episode 163, from time to time, Mr. Cantrell should be returning to the show because everybody loves it. This looks like it was a fun one. I only got to catch the very beginning on the live stream, so I will probably be downloading this after the show.
Because the interview went on for over an hour. It was great stuff.
Yeah, it was. I was in studio while it was going on, so I was watching the live stream out of the corner of my eye, and he was very animated.
Yes, well, he's always very animated, but we almost made him stroke out when we just were like serverless unikernel systemd and just watch him twitching. But all kinds of great stuff. We talked about what's wrong with Linux.
Sure.
The the OpenZFS Dev Summit. The power of small communities and why sometimes that's better. We talked about lots of other stuff. And also, he's got an upcoming conference that he's running this December called Systems We Love. So he did there's a meetup group called Papers We Love, where they do readings of computer science papers. And Cantrell went to New York and did one about FreeBSD jails and Solaris zones. And he basically kind of talked through this computer science research and how we actually applied that to real production systems and invented containers. Because, a lot of people don't know the history of, containers have been around for 15 years and how they came to be and what the features are. And he liked that so much that he decided that what we need was a conference where we just talk about systems we love, where, practitioners and people that actually sysadmins and people that run systems and build systems could talk about them without having to write a whole paper or something. It's systemswe.love, and that's a conference he's got going on in December in San Francisco, and it'll be quite interesting.
That sounds like it was a fascinating chat. Episode 163 of the BSC Now program. Go get the HD version because we're about the halfway point in this show. And it's a longer one, so we'll make sure to take a little bit longer so you have time to download the whole thing. That way you don't have to go a moment today without a little Jude in your face. Go check it out, BST Now, episode 163. And with the news all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting website, or maybe you asked our community at techsnap.reddit.com. Well, we have a whole batch of emails, Allan, and before we even get into them, we should probably disclose that coming up on October 27th, we'll be recording a double TechSNAP, and so if you don't hear your email read today, it could be that we're holding it, but we also need a lot more emails. So we need emails for next week's show, and on the 27th, we'll be doing a double snap. So lots of emails, good chance to get your question asked, but we have a good batch to get into right now. Let's start with JP's email. JP writes in, he says, "Hello guys and good day from down under. After hearing about how great FreeNAS and ZFS are, I thought I would finally give it a try." I think JP is reflective of a lot of people in the audience. He says, "I wanted to go with something simple. I don't need a lot. I have a laptop and a couple of external USB drives. The idea was to test the concept before sinking some real money into it. All I want is a mirrored file server for cold files. My laptop is nearing 100% full, and my phone and my camera SD cards are as well. So I got FreeNAS running on an old laptop off a USB stick, it's an 8 gig one, with a 2 1 terabyte external drives that are mirrored. So far, so good. My first trouble was setting up the permissions so I don't have to log in when hitting the file share from my Windows box. Do you have any hints here?"
Biggest hint there is create a username and password on the FreeNAS that are the same as your Windows one, and Windows will log you in automatically.
Okay, yeah. That's actually a great tip. Same username, same password, and then you don't even have to do SMB add for FreeNAS, right? It'll just...
Right. And then that way you can... it just works. That's what I do here.
Also, you can look at this share settings. You can set the file permission creation and folder permission creation so that they automatically get created with the rights that you want. So look around with that too.
Yeah.
All right.
But that's the biggest one. If you use a different username and password, then you're going to get the prompt all the time. Use the same one, Windows will just authenticate for you.
Yeah. And okay, now here's where this is kind of interesting. He says, while trying to get my permissions right, I noticed that my laptop, which is running FreeNAS, was getting hotter and hotter as it runs. A quick Google reveals that the CLI, I need to get temps. He was getting temps from this command line, and he says he's pushing 90 degrees Celsius. A short while later, the laptop crashes, and it can't boot until the CPU cools down a bit.
Which is odd. I wonder how old the laptop is, because newer, like anything modern, normally will scale the processor speed back automatically when you start getting to that temperature to avoid ever crashing and never getting to the point where it can't boot because it overheated like that. And he said he is having the same problem under Linux as well, so it's probably mostly hardware related. There's a couple of things here.
Do you think it's possible that because it's a USB, because there's two USB devices, maybe it's a software RAID, there's just a lot of load on the CPU when talking to the disk because USB uses the CPU?
There's some of that, but I think it's mostly just it sounds like this hardware is expecting the OS to control the fan, but that doesn't seem right either, because that definitely isn't the default in Windows either.
Yeah, it's not a Mac, right? I mean, that's...
yeah, you might be able to do something to force the fan up. The other thing you could do is very similar to the command you're doing to monitor the temperature. You can do like dev.cpu.0.freak and set the CPU frequency and basically permanently underclock it, because you're not going to need all that much CPU performance on the FreeNAS. And by forcing it down, you'll keep it from overheating. You know, sometimes just even doing the basics of clocking it down 1 or 2 notches will be enough.
That's a really good tip, because you don't really need all that CPU.
Well, in particular, so Intel CPUs have turbo boost, especially the very first generations of i7s and so on. It would get really, really hot during turbo boost. So, you know, if you have a 3.6 gigahertz processor, when you look at the list of allowed frequencies, there'll be 3600 and then 3601, which means allow turbo boost. And so if you set it to 3600, it'll just never turbo boost and won't get really hot that way.
You know, Allan,
but if you clock it down to say 2.5 or whatever, then it'll...
RMH in the chat room points out that if it's a laptop, it could be a laptop with dual graphics, and you're not maybe disable the proprietary graphics, use the Intel graphics.
Yep,
generates way less
that
heat.
Could also make a big difference.
Could check into that. All right, so he
often
says
in the BIOS there's a setting for that. I didn't think of that. My laptop has that even. I have a built-in NVIDIA with also an Intel, and if I'm trying to save battery, I'll kill the NVIDIA and run just the Intel. Especially now that FreeBSD had drivers for it. Back when I first got the laptop, when it was brand new, there weren't Intel drivers for Linux and BSD yet, but there are now. So I used to use the NVIDIA driver because it had, or NVIDIA graphics, it had the driver and better performance, but the Intel gives me better battery life. So yeah, obviously you won't have this problem when you get a real machine that you're putting hard drives in as well. But yeah, in the meantime, you can use the dev.cpu.0.freq, F-R-E-Q, to lower the CPU frequency and avoid the overheating. You can also run PowerD to automatically scale up and down, but that you could still overheat in that case.
Yeah. So JP had a final question, and I can't think of anything not off the top of my head, but he asked, have you heard of anybody reflashing Cisco routers with FreeBSD images?
The Cisco routers often use very specialized CPUs that there aren't generic setups for. Like I think most of them are probably MIPS, and they're relatively specific to Cisco. So I'm not aware of anybody managing to do that.
Yeah, I was trying to think like maybe like a Tomato or DDRW. No. I mean, not on the routers. Not on the
bigger Cisco devices.
90 degrees Celsius, though. Damn. I'd be curious, JP, if you managed to get that temperature down, let us know what you did. I like Allan's suggestion of CPU throttling. Look at the graphics. I mean, just play with it and see what works best for you.
The BIOS should be doing automatic thermal throttling. If it's not, I'm guessing your laptop is quite old. Just forcing the CPU temperature down, or the CPU frequency down. Like my i5 that's in my file server, I think goes down to 1.2 or 1.6 gigahertz is the lowest it'll do. And I mostly just leave it there all the time to save power. I'm not worried about temperature in the machine in my basement, but I am worried about power.
Now, if you have a question, I remember how I was just asking for more questions. If you have a question like JP's, a couple of things that would be super helpful. If you told us what type of CPU it was, if you told us what type of laptop it was, or how any of those kinds of hardware details, because we're kind of flying blind here. We don't know if JP's talking about an i7. We don't know if he's talking about a Core 2 Duo. There's a whole range we could be dealing with here. So that kind of information does help us give you a better answer. And what I would recommend is do a brief question. And then if you want to just do a hardware summary at the bottom,
Yes, that works better.
Like,
because then we can refer to it, but we don't have to try to.
Yeah. Thor is going to ask a question here, and look, Alan, right there at the bottom, he even used Markdown. He broke down his hardware there, so we have kind of an idea what to work with. So let me start with Thor here. He says, and by the way, I did also ask for questions. I will never, ever get tired of home server questions. I love home server questions. I love how you guys are using them, what you want to set up. I never get bored of them. So if you have a home server question for our double recordings coming up, please do send that in. But Thor writes in this week.
I've been doing home servers since I got my second computer.
They're so awesome.
As soon as I had a second computer, it was like, I want a home server.
The thing about a great home server setup is if you nail it and you get it just right, it actually makes your life a little bit easier. And
it's also the playground you need to learn things.
Yes, exactly. Yes, well said. All right, so Thor says, first things first, I want to build a home server and buy the necessary hardware. But he's learning and getting set up right now with an Acer H340 home NAS box. Okay, he says, I want to start by buying hard drives, but what's the best file system and operating system to use so I can migrate the drives to the new hardware once I have the funds? And I think it's important to understand what he's dealing with. The Acer H340 has an Intel Atom processor at 1.6 gigahertz.
And it's a 230, so that's a very old, very early generation Intel Atom.
Yeah, 2 gigs of RAM, DDR2.
Mm-hmm. 4 disk drives and his USB ports and an eSATA.
Yeah.
Couple of things. That Atom might be old enough that it's 32-bit only. I'm not sure on that one.
I can check.
If it is, then ZFS is out of the question for that. If it is 64-bit, then yes, FreeNAS, ZFS. ZFS is the best file system for being able to take your hard drives out and put them somewhere else. Because ZFS even goes so far as working on big endian and little endian hardware.
It is 64-bit. I'm looking on the Intel page.
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. FreeNAS, problem solved. It's the only way to be able to move your hard drives and be able to put them in FreeBSD, Linux, Illumos, Solaris, anything you can think of. Even OS X has OpenZFS as a thing you can install. And so it's really the best way to be able to have your hard drives where you can move them, not just when you want to upgrade your home NAS, but if something explodes and you need to get the data off the disks. Almost any computer in your house will be able to hook up to these hard drives and pull the data off.
How do you feel about 2 gigs of RAM?
That's a bit low. Now, to start with, you can do that, and until you can get more. If you can put more in that machine, that's great. He says he just got 4 gigs off eBay, but 4 gigs is probably the smallest you want to go. He didn't say how big the hard drives you get now are. Oh, it looks like he's starting with 1.5 terabytes.
Yeah, and also a 500 gigabyte in a mirror too. So
yeah. So it'll work, but eventually you really want to. Make sure you're getting more RAM for that.
He had a question regarding FreeNAS versus Open Media Vault. When it comes to CPU speed and RAM usage, do you think there's going to be much of a difference there?
I'm not very familiar with Open Media Vault.
I just recently, well, all of them. It'll do ZFS on Linux.
Right. So using ZFS, comparing ZFS FreeNAS to Open Media Vault, the FreeNAS version of ZFS might be slightly ahead because ZFS on Linux is a little bit behind, but not that much. In that case, you're fairly equivalent, although FreeNAS has been doing ZFS for a lot longer and probably is a little more integrated. And because FreeNAS only supports ZFS, it's really, really, really geared towards ZFS.
I think,
I'm just a BSD guy. I'm always going to pick FreeNAS. But
here's how I break it down. As a Linux,
at least use ZFS.
As a Linux guy, honestly, I'll tell you how I think about it. If you're going to tinker and you want to if you want to tinker and play with stuff, Open Media Vault is great. It's got a good heritage. It's fine. What I really like about FreeNAS is if it's something that is, I want it to be an appliance, I want it to be rock solid, and I want something that's going to last. I want to think about this every 3 to 5 years. What I really like about FreeNAS is it's got a long track record and it's got a really solid company behind it. So those are two things that I no longer have to worry about. And when it comes to my data, I like not worrying a lot.
And the other thing is, I don't know about Open Media Vault, but FreeNAS, the operating system, FreeNAS, is completely separate from your data. If you put FreeNAS on a USB stick and that USB stick dies, you just make a new one and boot FreeNAS, and it imports your data, and it's all there.
I did not test that, but
I have
tested that with FreeNAS, and I have been I have been blown away by how great that works. So that is a really good point because especially if you get like a FreeNAS Mini.
Especially like in his case, he wants to be able to later pull the hard drives out of his little Atom thing, put them in a real server, and have it just work, and it will with FreeNAS.
Yes. If you're going to move down the road, absolutely. I have done that. I have personally tested that, and I can tell you that FreeNAS really remarkable. The great thing about FreeNAS is you could totally F up the FreeNAS installation, and your data is totally fine. You can achieve that with Open Media Vault, but you lose a couple of things. You lose a couple of configuration things that are sort of important. You can do it, but it's not as smooth. Open Media Vault is based on Debian. So if you're more familiar with Debian and you do want to go under the hood and maybe install a few userland tools, you want to configure a few things using the command line, I find that the Open Media Vault route is a better one because it doesn't break the overall interface as much, and it's Debian, so there's tons of guides. But if you want that appliance, totally reliable, don't think about it, great plugins available, FreeNAS is the way to go. Yep. Just depends on your use case. All right.
Yeah, and he also quickly had a question about... he was looking at 8 terabyte hard drives. Make sure you don't get shingled. You want regular hard drives, not the shingled archive-only drives, because those are bad.
Okay.
But for a little while there, the only 8 terabytes you could get.
Yeah, I remember
now
talking
you
about
just have to make sure that now there are real regular 8 terabyte hard drives, but you have to make sure you're getting that, not the archive-only ones. The archive-only ones would usually say archive-only or shingled or like no RAID or something like that.
Okay.
But yes, he asked about maybe buying one Seagate and one Western Digital so they don't die at the same time. That's relatively not a bad plan. In general, hard drives, if they last the first 36 or 48 hours, they're probably going to last a couple of years. But, there is always random failures. There is some advantage to buying different ones.
There's also some advantage to buying the same ones in terms of firmware.
The same one, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's an advantage to getting both from the same.
All right.
But whatever you want to do there, it'll be fine.
You ready for Ben?
Yes.
So Ben's got like the opposite question than we normally get. He says, so this may be super counterintuitive and opposite of what most people, except for maybe 3-letter agencies, want, but I'm looking for a way to strip all encryption for an entire network. He's talking to everything, Allan, SSL, SSH, etc. The reason for stripping encryption is that it's intended for an amateur ham radio mesh network that is currently in the experiment stage in my area. And the wireless spectrum used, so this is part of a ham requirement. The wireless spectrum used by FCC Part 15 Wi-Fi equipment in the U.S. partially overlaps the spectrum that will be used and licensed by amateur radio operators. This is really neat because hams can build Wi-Fi networks using frequencies that aren't clogged up using off-the-shelf hardware. Hams can also run these networks at higher power than Part 15 Wi-Fi. In order to do this, however, the network must comply with FCC Part 97 rules. The biggest two are transmitting stations need to identify the operator's call sign every 10 minutes. This is easily accomplished by changing the MAC of a radio or sending a ping packet with the call sign as data. But also, encryption of any kind, number 2, is not allowed. This is a holdover from World War I and World War II and the Cold War, where the U.S. government was concerned about spies using radio transmissions to send data home, much like they fear the internet now. So he cannot use encryption as part of being a ham radio operator. Individual client computer clouds, I suppose, disable encryption for various devices connected over this network. So that's what the ham Seattle area ham WAN does. This is fascinating. I had no idea. So he has any questions about? He wants our ideas for a way to look at network level solutions that will allow traffic egressing on a network and remove the encryption, some sort of proxy or internet handoff, maybe.
Yeah. So, in order to do that, what you would have to do is have an SSL use SSL strip or something on basically the router that all these machines are using to access the internet. And so every client machine would have to trust the fake certificate you gave the stripper to rip all the SSL off of everything. Your big problem here is that would mean if somebody goes to check their email, their username and password would be going over the air in the clear. So you're probably better off trying to block most encrypted things than actually trying to decrypt them. Because if people are expecting to use encryption for something, you really might not want to remove the encryption for them and just, push it through anyway. If you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So that's it?
Yeah, I'm quite sure that the FCC rules on this never really considered people browsing the internet over it and SSL.
Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You'd have to. You definitely have to have access to all the client machines.
Right. So you'd have to basically. There are SSL intercept type things you can do. When I originally just read the subject of this client or the email, I was thinking, my friend's company makes this appliance that strips SSL off so that you can feed the traffic into your monitoring tools that maybe don't support SSL so that they can scan stuff for viruses. But if you want to send everything, there's a tool called SSL strip that can do some stuff. And the other stuff, I think really your goal is going to have to be maybe blocking like HTTPS outright. Because you don't want people logging into their Gmail over this Wi-Fi where anybody can capture the traffic and see their username and password going back.
Yeah, I was just thinking of maybe like a sort of setup like I've done on a Windows network once before, where there is an SSL man in the middle where he strips off all SSL and looks at the traffic. There's something like that could be done, but
yeah. So that's what SSL strip does. It's a tool, for tricking people on Wi-Fi. The bigger problem is that you have to get the certificate that SSL strip uses when intercepting trusted on all the client machines, or you can just allow the big scary warning whenever somebody tries to use encryption, and maybe that's actually your solution is that you issue a self-signed certificate that specifically says, as the name of the company or whatever is, all encryption's not allowed. I'm going to strip all your encryption. Don't go forward with this connection if there's anything private over this connection or something like that. All right.
I'm gonna think on this too, because it's a really great idea. It's a really interesting question.
Yeah, it was one of the things that came up recently is hams are really important in cases like natural disasters where the regular phone lines maybe are down and we need these long distance communication links to get things like, tell your family you're okay, or summon help and things like that, where we need the long distance communication and we can't depend on the traditional landlines.
Yeah. Are you ready for our last minute submission
the
of the show?
government should just get out of the way on that one, but
it does feel like a holdover, doesn't it?
Yeah, but yeah, what are you going to do?
RMH with a last-minute submission via the chat room, but he selects it himself, so how could I say no? He says, hi there, Allan and Chris. I want to set up a guest network in a few rooms, and I want to rent it out. Basically, they get their own WLAN router, which is attached to my network. In my part of the network, I have a static IP with television set up.
Satellite to IP television.
Oh, satellite to IP television, basically a box with 4 LNBs making a multicast playlist on its own IP. LNB, Allan?
Yes, it's the landside receiver for satellite.
Okay. How can I get that multicast signal and the signal of switching channels to and back and forth out of the guest network so they too can have their very own satellite IP television? Can I use routing tables? And if so, what do I need to set up for that in my network and the guest network? For reasons of how the cables are strut throughout the wall, this is the only feasible option for me. I can't lay another Cat5 from the satellite dish to the guest accommodation.
This probably is going to come down to your switch. I'm not that familiar with multicast because it's not used in very many things other than like satellite TV distribution for IPTV. Some switches can do automatic VLAN stuff where you can allow certain traffic to get into other VLANs. So you'd have, each room in the house would have its own VLAN, and they'd all be trunked back to your router that goes out to the internet. And so on your pfSense or whatever that's running your internet connection, it'll see separate interfaces for each network from each of the different rooms that you're renting out. But the switch will let the multicast traffic go into them. Or maybe, you might be able to do some kind of multicast proxy or something to push the packets.
That's what I was, is there, what would that be though?
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with multicast and how to actually do this. That is a very good question. Sadly, I think you need someone that's got more. This is a very specific knowledge domain that I don't have much background.
I'm not sure how much success he's going to have in answering this question.
Well, there's definitely should be a way to do it.
Yeah. I still feel like, though, this is...
Basically, I think it's going to depend on having a smart enough switch that can actually handle multicast and putting the packets in the right VLANs or whatever.
I think there's another way to crack this particular egg myself. I don't know. But for me, if I had a room where I was renting out and I wanted to offer them a television service, I think I would probably just invest the time in setting up something that was under my own control and manageable by myself. And I have a couple of different ideas, but some of them might not be technically legal. But there's a lot of ways you could do this. So I would maybe consider a few.
Right, but it seems like he's already got this set up, and it probably worked until he tried to segregate the network into multiple pieces.
Sure.
But I think it's just a matter of the switch. There's like multicast snooping or GRM something. What's it called?
What about also restructuring the way the network was? So instead of isolating them out, create maybe this is the LAN that some of these things are shared, and then isolate out your own machines onto their own separate network. So sort of reverse the way this is segregated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Maybe people can let us know. Give us your ideas. TechSNAP.reddit.com. There'll be a feedback thread for 288.
IGMP snooping is often what it's called. IGMP snooping is the process of listening for Internet Group Messaging Protocol network traffic. Maybe this isn't what he wants.
Yeah.
A switch will, by default, flood multicast traffic to all ports in the broadcast domain or the VLAN equivalent. Multicast can cause unnecessary load on host devices, and so this is a protocol for the switch to know where people actually care. It's often used for multicast for IPTV. So yes, it might be the feature you want to look into is IGMP snooping.
There you go. So RMH says he's going to submit it to the subreddit. So if you do have a thought on this, look for his post, techsnap.reddit.com, and get your questions into us. Some good ones this week. Some definitely off the wall questions. Some in our zone, but some that are totally off the wall. And I'd love to have more. TechSNAP@jupiterbroadcasting.com.
It's like on BSD Now, we often like getting questions we don't know the answer to. Maybe somebody in the audience does and can write in for next week. And
why not?
Hey, someone's brought it to me. Has the answer to this question.
Yeah, it's actually kind of a fun process for us.
Yeah, and he's going to put it up in our subreddit so that people can find it and post stuff up.
Pow. All right, so go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com, click the contact link, choose TechSNAP from the dropdown, and send us in your question for next week's episode. And we may or may not have an answer, but at least we'll all have a great conversation. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the roundup are stories that just didn't fit at the top of the show, but we still want to give you some links to follow up on your own after the show. And some of these links came from our intelligence network over at techsnap.reddit.com. But the first one this week, well, that just came from my extreme amount of all of a sudden, what a brilliant boost of productivity I had. Yes, that's right. Telegram was down this morning. And it was mostly affecting North America and Latin America. I guess the cooling system died in one of their data centers. They had extreme overheating. The data's okay, but the servers themselves, they went down.
Yeah, it seems like, I thought you should have a strategy for that where you shut down a lot of servers you don't need. But I don't know, like every time data centers I've been in, they were like, yeah, we're going to shut down one of the air conditioners for maintenance. And so we brought in a bunch of portable things and we have people around monitoring the temperature. And we don't expect the temperature to get more than 5 degrees above normal. And if it does, then we'll take this action. And
this has been an interesting thing. During the outage.
What's really interesting there is they seem to they run all the traffic for North America out of one data center.
A single data center, yeah.
It's like a bad plan.
DigitalOcean.com. Use the promo code SNAPOcean.
Multiple U.S. data centers.
Yeah.
Problem solved. You can do Toronto, New York, and San Francisco. Be protected.
I saw this all over Twitter, and Telegram actually had to respond to it. I guess when Telegram hasn't gone down a lot, and so the average person's response apparently was to delete the app and reinstall it and try to set it up, which just DDoSed them even more. So Telegram just tweeted hashtag tip in case we ever have any issues. Remember, reinstalling the app never helps. And thanks to everyone for the kind words. And then Telegram furthers that up with reinstalling the app is akin to bombing out a bar instead of just punching somebody in the face. Bombing the bar instead of punching them in the face. But yeah, so if for some reason
unprofessionalism, but anyway,
I like it. It was kind of they had a good amount of levity during the outage, but they also were very good about tweeting people that were asking them about specific questions about the outage. They actually replied pretty consistently. So sometimes they said a few things that might be a little, out there, but at least they're responding to an outage. What do you think about this one? Microsoft is patching 5 0 days that are currently out in the wild.
Yep. That kind of meshes a bit more with the story we have coming up. But you'll notice you didn't get 5 patches. Yes, 5 big 0 days from Microsoft, and then Adobe also released 81 fixes for a combination of Acrobat Reader and Flash. So update all of your things.
And speaking of updating all of your things, Adobe has fixed 81 vulnerabilities in Acrobat Reader and Flash.
Sorry, I just said that.
Oh, you did? Oh. Well, okay.
Apparently, Telegram is a 2-man operation.
That's what I was reading in the chat room too. Which I don't. How could that be? How can that be? Can't be.
Well,
can't be. I disagree. That's what I just said in the chat room.
Well,
I disagree.
WhatsApp's team is like 20 people.
I think it takes one person just to tweet that much.
Well, yeah, that's why it wasn't getting fixed right.
Yeah. All right. So BitTorrent is reportedly firing its CEOs as it gets out of the media game. It's going to just
BitTorrent's finally going to figure out that BitTorrent is not where people want to go to buy movies.
Huh. Seems like the rest of us figured that out quite a while ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
How about this one? New OpenSSL double free and invalid free vulnerabilities. It's free, everybody, in X509 pricing.
This one's interesting because OpenSSL has decided not to do a CVE number for these because the attacks are caused when attempting to allocate memory or create a new thread fails, which normally wouldn't happen. But if someone manages to, run your system out of memory and then do this, then they could exploit the bug. Because it would require that amount of setup. OpenSSL is like, we're not going to do a vulnerability number and everything for it. We'll just fix it in the next version. Maybe that wasn't the right call. We'll have to see.
Those of you considering migrating off of Yahoo, that task might have just been made a slight bit more challenging. Yahoo is turning off its email forwarding service. After literally having it in production for 20 years, Yahoo has declared that the feature is in development. And they've taken it offline temporarily while they work to improve it.
Well, see, the thing is that things have changed a lot recently, and I'm guessing, Yahoo email, because a lot of spam gets sent to people's 20-year-old email addresses, Yahoo's getting flagged as spam in, say, everybody's Gmail because the amount, there's more spam than real email that comes through from Yahoo because the email addresses are so old.
Yeah.
This is the problem I have. Like one of my personal old email addresses forwards to my Gmail, and it often ends up in the spam because Google's just decided all that email coming from my IP address is spam because there's so much spam, and it's a problem.
Yeah,
so,
what it is?
Yahoo's excuse for this might actually be legitimate.
The timing just sucks with the revelation about the NSA monitoring and all of that.
Yes, and more people are trying to, but the NSA monitoring affects you whether they forward the email or if they keep it there. So, in the end, that doesn't make a difference. Mm-hmm. But yes, it could be a play by Yahoo to try to keep you using Yahoo's web interface to check your mail.
Yeah. All right. Well, this one comes from Krebs. Microsoft says no more pick and choose patching for you.
Yeah. So if you noticed in your to do your Windows updates this month, you saw 2 patches. The October 2016 quarterly monthly quality roll-up for Windows. They kind of took too many keywords in that sentence. That just doesn't flow nice.
No.
Security monthly quality roll-up.
That's how they roll.
But and then there's a separate roll-up for .NET, and those are your only 2 patches. And then there'll be a November apparently, and so on.
And you're gonna like
it. Instead of a list of vulnerability, a list of their MS number things you normally get, you just get October quarterly roll-up and the November quarterly roll-up and so on, or quality roll-up. Sounds too much like quarterly, even though it's monthly. But anyway, monthly quality roll-ups are what we're getting now. The downside is that, if something goes wrong with the install there, you don't get any of the patches instead of only the patch that didn't work.
Yeah.
And you can't easily opt out of one patch. I don't know. This might actually be easier for people. It's hard to say.
Yeah. Ford's got some dirty laundry, well, at least according to documents that were revealed in a class action lawsuit against Ford and its original My Ford in-vehicle entertainment system. The documents from 2013 lawsuit show Ford engineers believed the in-vehicle entertainment system that was powered by the Sync operating system might be unusable, and even described later as a polished turd by their very own engineers.
And unsaleable.
Yeah.
I have the... Our car has the very basic one. Like, it doesn't have a touchscreen or anything. It's got like a 4-line LED display.
Yeah, with the voice too for stuff. Yeah.
No, it doesn't have any voice stuff.
Oh,
It's
really?
just very, very basic sync.
Okay.
Takes forever when I plug my phone into it, but eventually it does play the music. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm guessing the newer thing is that with a screen attached to it. No wonder it's terrible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, it also, the whole sync thing was Microsoft, so.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just funny to see their engineers just calling it like it is. When those of us who are familiar with good interface design and then sit down and something like that, we're like, oh.
We're not even talking about the interface design at this point. We're talking about the underlying, the code just doesn't work.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. All right. So how about this one? macOS Sierra permanently remembers your SSH key passphrases, by default.
Yeah. The SSH agent seems to be slightly not working the right way, and just you type in your passphrase once and it remembers it forever, and just your key is always available. Probably not what you were expecting.
Also, the traditional Unix pull functionality broken in macOS Sierra. So if you've noticed curl is no longer working or tools that use pull, yeah, Apple broke it in macOS Sierra. And so one of the first things that I've noticed.
Also, if you try to mount something over NFS, it will just crash immediately.
It sounds like a solid release. All right. This one's been getting our audience all riled up. Comcast is deploying its 1 terabyte plan. And they also have offered a $50 upgrade option for unlimited data. But what's really kind of getting people is people that didn't have caps before are now getting caps. And I got
although 1 terabyte cap's not so bad as 200 gigs and so on that we saw before.
The issue seems to be, so I got contacted this week by an audience member where Comcast, when they rolled this out, said last month you used 996 gigabytes of data usage. And he checked his own stats, and he shows like 500 and something gigabytes. So it's almost half of what Comcast shows. So he's not clear on what Comcast is using to measure, because he's measuring it using pfSense at the edge of his network.
Is he measuring both directions? Because I'm sure Comcast does, even though they probably mostly care about upload. They're mostly charging for download,
sure.
But I'm sure they're catching both directions.
Yeah.
But yes, it's entirely possible that their numbers are wrong or inflated.
Remember how the Internet of Things is going to save us all time? Well, an Englishman has spent 11 hours trying to make a cup of tea with his Wi-Fi kettle.
Yes. Now, most of this 11 hours obviously spent trying to debug it. But, it's like, I'm originally become an IT person. Why can't I get this damn thing to make me a cup of tea? Interesting story. We're checking out if you're interested in Internet of Terrible being terrible.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. Okay. So Microsoft's. Oh, was that doubled up in the freaking roundup?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. There you go. Hey, look at us. Look at us.
You doubled me up.
You know what? It's because it's such an interesting story. That's why I doubled down on it. This is interesting. Is why does Sonic the Hedgehog run faster in America? Well, it turns out it comes down to your television's refresh rate. I guess over here, 60 hertz was sort of the common, but over the pond, 50 hertz was the standard. And turns out in the U.S., that meant 30 frames per second on U.S. televisions and 25 frames per second on UK televisions. Yep. So that's all it took for a little bit of a difference there.
And you can just, they have the animation showing the start screen and how much slower the game was.
Yeah, you do see it. You do notice it, yeah. That's a good GIF. Wow.
Anyway, they have a whole video explaining how it all worked and so on, but I just thought people might find that interesting.
Now, nobody is surprised by this story. An ex-Yahoo employee says that the government spy program could have given a hacker access to all the different emails. And it's really more about how this tool could have been exploited by an attacker to use it. And it's sort of a great reminder of when you create a legitimate backdoor access to something, it can be perverted by attackers.
Exactly. And it's what we've been saying the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah. A good piece, though, by The Intercept. Nice to see them covering that. All right. Well, if you'd like to contribute to our roundup, you can. TechSNAP.reddit.com. Go submit a link there. We check that before each and every single show. And don't forget, we'll have a double coming up in a couple of weeks. So you can submit your stories for that and your emails, and you can watch it live. All the live times, they're all made clear over at jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar. And you can watch it at jblive.tv. And is there anything else we need to mention this week, Alan, before we get out of here?
Nope. Just remember that 2 weeks from now on the 27th, show up early because we're double recording.
Yeah.
And please send us more emails.
And if you're an RSS subscriber, you don't have to do a thing. You'll just automatically get each new episode as they come out, and it'll just be nice and smooth. Also, don't forget...
And if you can make it to Berkeley, you should be at MeetBSD, which will be November 11th.
Come say hi to Alan, Chris, myself, producer Q5Sys at MeetBSD. And I was going to say, don't forget that everything we've talked about, anything we've referenced, it's all linked in the show notes. Just go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com and look for episode 288. And Mr. Jude has documented all, and we've linked it all right there. So you can just get a story or a tip, anything, or even go read one of the emails that was sent into the show just by checking the show notes. Okay, everybody, thanks so much for tuning in this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week.